The train station fell silent. 7 SEAL dogs suddenly broke formation and charged toward a woman sitting alone. She was 8 months pregnant, clutching a small wooden music box. Within seconds, the dogs surrounded her, barking wildly, and no one could understand why. Security froze. Passengers ran. But one man, Caleb Stone, a retired SEAL, saw something in their eyes. Not aggression, something else. What happened next would uncover a secret buried for 10 years and prove that sometimes even chaos carries a purpose written by God Himself. You're watching SEAL Dog Stories. If you believe in loyalty, faith, and second chances, stay with us, and don't forget to subscribe. Snow had just melted, leaving the platform glazed with a thin sheen of water that shimmered under the cold Denver light. The wind carried the smell of metal and coffee, familiar, yet lonely. Evelyn Brooks sat on a wooden bench near Gate 3, her hands resting on the curve of her stomach. She was 8 months along. Her coat was too thin for the weather, but she didn't seem to notice. What she held tighter was a small olive wood music box, its lid rubbed smooth from years of touch. The melody it once played was faint now, a whisper trapped inside old gears. Every few minutes she brushed her thumb over the carved initials on top. A.B., her husband's. He'd been gone for 6 months. A blast in the desert, they said, no body, just a folded flag and a letter signed by someone who never looked her in the eye. The train announcement echoed, but she didn't move. In the reflection of the glass, her face looked older than 33, pale, with the quiet endurance of someone who'd run out of tears. On the opposite side of the hall, Caleb Stone, 47, adjusted the strap of his service jacket and glanced down at the line of dogs pacing beside him. 7 German shepherds, each a survivor of missions that most men wouldn't return from. Their breaths formed faint clouds in the air, steady, disciplined. Caleb walked with a slight limp, an old wound from Kandahar, and carried the silence of someone who'd buried more friends than he cared to count. "Ranger, heel," he said quietly. The lead dog slowed, obedient, eyes scanning the crowd with practiced calm. Ranger was 9, older than the rest, his muzzle silvering at the edges. Caleb had worked with him for nearly a decade. He trusted the dog more than most humans. But today, something about Ranger's focus felt restless. The shepherd's ears flicked once, twice, then fixed on something across the platform. Caleb followed his gaze. A woman in a pale coat, sitting alone, unmoving, her hands on her stomach. He felt, for reasons he couldn't explain, that the air between them shifted slightly, like a wire humming with invisible tension. Evelyn noticed them next, the dogs in formation, the man in the dark field jacket with that measured military stillness. She thought they looked like a small army carved from shadow and discipline. For a heartbeat, one of the dogs, bigger than the rest, lifted its head and met her eyes. There was no threat in that gaze, only recognition, as though the creature remembered something she'd lost. Her fingers trembled over the music box. Aaron had owned a dog once during his service, a canine named Ranger. He'd told her stories about missions where the dog saved lives before vanishing into the dust. She'd laughed then, thinking those tales belonged to a world far away. Yet the name echoed now in her mind like an answered prayer. The wind gusted through the hall, rattling the thin metal signs. Evelyn lowered her head, whispering to her child, "We'll be okay. Daddy promised." The words caught in her throat as the box shifted in her lap, giving off a faint, accidental note. A single chime of "You Are My Sunshine." The sound hung in the air, fragile as breath. Caleb froze. Ranger's head jerked toward the melody instantly, his tail stiffened, ears sharp. Then, without warning, the dog broke formation. "Ranger!" Caleb barked, but the shepherd was already moving, steady, purposeful, not aggressive, but drawn. The other 6 followed, their paws tapping rhythmically against the wet concrete. Passengers turned, startled, As 7 military dogs surrounded the woman on the bench, Evelyn's eyes widened. Fear, instinctive, surged through her. She clutched the box and took a step back, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. The dogs didn't growl. They didn't attack. They simply formed a quiet circle around her, bodies tense, heads lowered, tails rigid as if bracing against something unseen. Caleb ran forward, hand raised to his radio. "Hold positions! Easy, team!" His voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. But the dogs weren't listening to him. They were listening to something else entirely. The air filled with a strange calm, a silence that vibrated more than it sounded. Evelyn stood in the middle of that circle, the music box trembling in her hands. She felt a sudden warmth, almost human, radiating from the wall of fur around her. Her fear shifted into something harder to name. Confusion, awe, the sense that she was being protected. The melody still lingered faintly, like a heartbeat. Caleb reached her slowly. He noticed the strain in her breathing, the way one hand shielded her stomach. "Ma'am," he said softly, lowering his tone. "They're not here to hurt you." I don't understand," she whispered. "What's happening?" Caleb looked down at Ranger. The dog's eyes were locked on the box she held. "That song," he murmured. "Where did you get that box?" "It belonged to my husband," she said. "Captain Aaron Brooks, Navy SEAL." For a long moment the terminal went completely still. Caleb's throat tightened. The name hit him like a buried memory clawing to the surface. He knew that name. Everyone who'd ever served in Halcyon knew it. Outside, the snow began to fall again, slow, deliberate flakes drifting through the air vents onto the platform floor. Ranger sat down beside the woman's feet, pressing close to her leg, as if taking guard. Caleb exhaled, his voice barely more than a whisper. Ranger served with Aaron. Evelyn blinked, tears spilling silently down her face. The music box stopped playing, its final note fading into the sound of distant trains. Caleb glanced around. The crowd had stepped back, watching in reverent silence. For the first time in a long while, he felt something unfamiliar rising in his chest. Not duty, not fear. Something gentler. He looked at her and said quietly, "Maybe he never really left." Evelyn closed her eyes, her hand resting over the dog's head. For the first time since Aaron's death, the world didn't feel entirely empty. Somewhere deep inside the wooden box, a spring clicked softly as if the song wasn't finished after all. The station lights flickered softly against the glass roof as evening shadows gathered. Outside, the air had turned sharp and cold, and the sky was the color of faded steel. The circle of dogs stood motionless around Evelyn Brooks, their breath rising in ghostly puffs that mingled with the thin mist curling through the platform. Her heart pounded. The old music box still played, its fractured melody echoing between the marble walls. "You are my sunshine." It sounded wrong now, too slow, like a heartbeat trying to remember how to keep rhythm. Evelyn's knees trembled, but she couldn't run. There was something in the dog's eyes, devotion, not danger, that held her still. Caleb Stone moved carefully through the frozen crowd. "Easy," he said, voice low, steady. The passengers obeyed the tone more than the words. His boots left dark prints on the wet concrete. He stopped just beyond the circle, watching Ranger's body language. No hostility, only deep focus. The shepherd's ears were rigid, his nose trembling faintly as if he were reading invisible air. Caleb crouched slightly, murmuring, "Ranger, what are you hearing, boy?" But Ranger didn't look at him. His gaze stayed fixed on the box pressed against Evelyn's chest. Evelyn's breath came shallow. Her fingers tightened around the olive wood until her knuckles whitened. "Please," she whispered, "tell them to stop." Caleb raised a hand, giving a quiet whistle. None of the dogs moved. For a moment he felt something tighten in his chest. An old instinct from the battlefield. They know something I don't. He looked up and saw the terror in the woman's eyes, eyes that were not only afraid, but recognizing. Then came the sound that silenced everything else, a high-pitched tone, faint but distinct, escaping from the music box. It wasn't the tune anymore. It was a pulse, like static. Caleb pulled the small receiver from his vest and glanced at the readout. The device flickered, then lit with a green code he hadn't seen in years. SEAL 9 active. His stomach dropped. That frequency had been terminated 6 months ago, the day Captain Aaron Brooks's file was marked KIA. He looked up, his voice tightening. "Ma'am, your husband. Was his name Aaron Brooks?" Evelyn froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Then the tears broke loose, soundless, raw. She nodded once, as if admitting something sacred. He died last spring. They told me—" "I know what they told you," Caleb said softly. His eyes, pale and lined, softened. "I served with him. Ranger did too." Her breath hitched. "Ranger?" She looked down at the dog, who now pressed closer, eyes warm, tail still. "That can't be." The melody ended. The final note trembled and fell into silence. One of the dogs whined low, almost mournful. Caleb stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "I need you to come with me, Mrs. Brooks. There's something wrong with that signal. It shouldn't exist anymore." They moved slowly through the corridor toward the security office, escorted by the dogs. The crowd parted to let them pass, whispers trailing behind. Evelyn clutched the box, still feeling its faint vibration against her palm. Her mind swirled, memories of Aaron's last call from overseas, his voice rough from exhaustion. "If something happens, don't throw it away. The song will know what to do." At the time, she had thought it was metaphor, his poetic way of saying goodbye. Now, walking beside a stranger and 7 dogs that obeyed no human command, it felt like prophecy. In the control room, screens flickered with security feeds. Caleb placed his receiver on the desk. The same frequency flashed again, irregular, pulsing from somewhere within the box. He turned to her. "Mrs. Brooks, I need to open it." Evelyn hesitated. "It's all I have left of him." "I understand," he said quietly. "But if that signal is real, it means someone else still thinks he's alive." She looked at him for a long time. In his face, she saw the same weary truth she carried, grief disguised as endurance. Slowly, she placed the box on the table. The dog sat behind her in a perfect line, silent, waiting. Caleb reached for his multi-tool and slid it under the latch. As he lifted the lid, a faint click echoed through the room. The melody began again, but this time, beneath the notes, there was a coded tone repeating in sequence. Caleb stared at the monitor. The receiver decoded fragments of an old identifier, Halcyon Protocol, Aaron Brooks, Field Node R07. His hands trembled slightly. "Halcyon?" he murmured. "That program was buried years ago." Evelyn frowned. "You mean the project he worked on?" "Yes, they said it ended, but this—" He gestured toward the display. "This says otherwise." Ranger whined again, standing up. His gaze turned toward the window, muscles stiff. Outside, across the parking lot, a man in a dark coat lingered by a black SUV, phone pressed to his ear. Caleb followed Ranger's stare, his instincts snapping awake. "Someone's listening," he muttered. "They shouldn't know about this frequency." Evelyn stepped back, fear returning. "Are we in danger?" He didn't answer. The dog's growl said, "Enough." Caleb reached for his radio. "Unit 2, lock down the platform. We may have a live breach." Static hissed. The line was dead. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. Whoever was out there knew exactly what they were doing. He turned to Evelyn, his tone gentler now. "Stay close to Ranger. No matter what happens, don't let go of that box." She nodded faintly. "What's happening, Mr. Stone?" He met her eyes. "Something your husband may have died trying to stop." Outside, the man by the SUV lit a cigarette, then disappeared into the dark. Caleb felt the faint hum of the signal pulse again, steadier, clearer, almost alive. He looked at the dogs, then Evelyn. Somewhere inside that wooden box, a story Aaron Brooks had died to protect was breathing again, and none of them yet understood what it would cost. The rain had started again, soft as breath against the glass. Inside the dim control room, the lights flickered, a steady pulse of amber and blue across rows of screens. The scent of metal, old coffee, and wet fur filled the air. Somewhere in that stillness, the faint hum of the receiver continued, its rhythm calm but unnerving, like a heartbeat that refused to die. Caleb Stone stood beside the console, eyes fixed on the monitor where the decoded signal repeated in looping fragments. E9 Faith Beacon, Project Halcyon, active node. The letters glowed in a steady green, indifferent to the disbelief tightening his jaw. He hadn't seen that code since the desert, since the day the mission was shut down and the men who carried it in their bones were told never to speak of it again. Across the room, Evelyn sat hunched in a metal chair, both hands pressed over her stomach. Her breath fogged the air, uneven but calm. The music box rested on the desk beside her, silent now, its wooden surface still damp from the rain that had followed them in. "Is it dangerous?" she asked quietly. Caleb didn't answer right away. He stared at the flickering signal, then at Ranger, who sat alert near the door. The dog's ears twitched, his eyes unblinking. "Not yet," Caleb finally said, "but someone else just heard it too." Outside the window, the faint blur of movement caught his eye. A man in a black coat stood near the edge of the parking lot, his face obscured beneath a brimmed hat. The man lifted a phone to his ear, speaking words they couldn't hear, but Caleb didn't need to. He knew that posture, the stance of someone trained, deliberate, waiting for orders. He murmured to himself, "We're not alone anymore." Ranger growled low, the sound rolling like thunder through his chest. The other dogs tensed in quiet response, forming a half-circle by the entrance as if preparing for something unseen. Evelyn turned toward the window, eyes wide. "Is someone following us?" Caleb gave a slow nod. "If that signal reached an open frequency, they'll come for it. They'll come for you." "Why me?" she whispered. He looked down at the box. "Because your husband didn't just make music, Mrs. Brooks. He made a beacon." He moved to the scanner and adjusted the settings. The screen revealed more layers of data, encrypted bursts hidden within the melody's waveform. It wasn't random. It was a code buried under notes, a sequence of frequencies that matched old military channels from Project Halcyon. Caleb exhaled, running a hand over his stubble. Aaron must have embedded this before his final deployment. Evelyn blinked through tears. "But why?" "To leave a trail," he said softly. "For someone he trusted." His eyes met hers. The air thickened between them, not with fear, but with something deeper. Shared loss, recognition. The radio on the table crackled suddenly, alive for just a breath. A distorted male, voice whispered through static. "Asset E01 has transmitted. Prepare retrieval." The voice faded, replaced by silence. Caleb's pulse quickened. "They've already made contact." Evelyn's voice broke. "Who are they?" "The same people who buried Halcyon," he said. "Aether Core Systems. And they don't leave loose ends." The next moment stretched thin. Caleb shut down the monitor, cutting the signal feed. "Pack up. We're leaving," he said. Evelyn hesitated. "Where?" "Somewhere they won't find us before I figure out why that code is alive again." He moved with careful precision, sliding the music box into a secure field case. Ranger followed his every motion, tail rigid, eyes darting between door and window. The other dogs formed up behind, an unspoken discipline returning to their ranks. As Caleb reached for his radio again, static hissed, then cleared, replaced by a voice that made his blood run cold. "Stone, this is Diaz. We've got movement outside. 2 vehicles. No plates. Looks like they're scanning the lot." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Copy. Keep your team low. We're moving to sub-level 3. He turned to Evelyn. "Stay behind Ranger. Don't speak unless I say so." The fear in her eyes deepened, but beneath it there was resolve. She nodded once. They slipped into the maintenance corridor. The walls were damp, lined with pipes that dripped cold water in rhythmic intervals. Each drop echoed like the ticking of a clock counting down. Ranger led the way, his paws soundless on the concrete. Evelyn's mind spun through fragments of memory. Aaron's voice, the last time he'd held her hand, the promise he made before the mission. If you ever hear the song again, follow the sound. It means I'm still watching over you. She whispered the words under her breath as if to herself. You're still watching, aren't you? Behind her, Caleb caught the tremor in her voice. He said quietly, Men like your husband. They don't die easy. Sometimes what they leave behind finds a way to keep breathing. When they reached the lower level, Caleb signaled Ranger to stop. The dog stiffened, nose raised. What is it, boy? A faint metallic click echoed from ahead, the unmistakable sound of a weapon being loaded. Caleb pushed Evelyn gently behind a pillar and drew his sidearm. Through the dim corridor light, he caught a glimpse of the man in black stepping from the shadows, an earpiece glinting beneath his collar. The man spoke into it, voice calm. Target confirmed. Asset E01 secured. Then he turned and met Ranger's eyes. The dog's growl rolled deep and long, a sound that made the concrete tremble. Snow drifted against the windows like ash, soft but relentless. In the control room, the hum of machines had quieted, leaving only the muted ticking of a single monitor. The light from its screen painted pale reflections across Caleb's face, lines cut deep by time, and things he no longer said out loud. The analysis was complete. Across the monitor, the logo appeared. Ethercore Systems. Signal source. Classified. Caleb's stomach turned. The name carried too many ghosts. He remembered the briefings, the contracts, the promises made to men who were now buried under numbers and lies. Aaron Brooks had tried to expose them. Caleb knew that now. He remembered the encrypted message Aaron had once sent, months before the mission collapsed. They're not who they claim to be. Evelyn stood beside him, her hands trembling as she traced the edge of the music box. The air around her smelled faintly of cedar and rain. Before he left, she said softly, Aaron told me, if something ever happens, the song will show the way. Her voice was almost a whisper. I thought he meant hope. Caleb didn't look at her. He did, but it's also a map. He pressed a key, and the monitor shifted, displaying coordinates flickering between Denver, Seattle, and a remote stretch of forest in Montana. That's where Halcyon used to run their testing, he murmured. Aethercore kept a listening base out there. They monitored us, every mission, every soldier, every dog. Evelyn's eyes widened. You mean they tracked you? Tracked, measured, owned, he said quietly. When Aaron found out, he tried to shut it down. That's probably why they killed him. The words hung heavy in the air, a truth too cruel to carry. Ranger shifted beside them, his fur bristling, nose twitching toward the frosted glass. He let out a single sharp bark. Caleb's head snapped up. Through the window, headlights flashed once, then again, low and deliberate, the rhythm of military code. Diaz, Caleb whispered into his comm. You seeing that? Diaz's reply came through static. 2 vehicles, unmarked, black SUVs. They just split up around the east lot. Caleb's pulse steadied. They found us. The control room came alive in a rush of motion. Caleb sealed the data drive and slipped the music box into his jacket. Evelyn, stay behind Ranger. If anything happens, you don't stop running. I can't just leave you, she said. He gave her a faint, weary smile. That's not your choice anymore. Outside, the sound of engines echoed against the wet pavement. Red lights bled through the fog. Ranger growled again, low and steady, the way he used to before an ambush. The rest of the dogs tightened formation behind him, bodies tense, eyes bright, waiting for a single word. Caleb drew in a slow breath. Ranger, lead. The door burst open, cold wind flooding in. Snow whirled under the fluorescent light, as the team moved. Out, their shadows stretching across the slick ground like silent soldiers reborn. They slipped into the loading bay. The air was sharp with gasoline and salt. Caleb motioned toward Diaz and McKenna, both waiting by a vehicle. Diaz, 38, wiry with a scar down his neck, met Caleb's eyes with quiet certainty. "You really want to do this again?" Caleb's jaw tightened. They made it personal. McKenna, younger, with frost clinging to his beard, loaded his rifle and muttered, "Then let's make it worth their time." Caleb ignored the weapons. "No shots unless I say. We're not soldiers anymore." He turned to Evelyn, who clutched her coat closed against the wind. "When we move, stay low. The van's 1 block north." From beyond the lot came the hum of tires, then movement. A black SUV rolled from the mist, its headlights slicing through the dark. Another appeared behind it, engines rumbling like an animal waiting to strike. "Go," Caleb shouted. Ranger leapt first, his paws splashing through shallow puddles as snow whipped sideways. The other dogs followed, 7 streaks of motion under the orange streetlight. The chase tore through the parking lot and down a narrow service road that ran behind the station. The SUVs accelerated, tires hissing against wet asphalt. One veered close, grazing the curb. Caleb ducked behind a pillar, pulling Evelyn with him. The headlights swept across her face, wide, terrified, but steady. Ranger darted forward, barking sharply, herding the dogs toward the rear of the nearest vehicle. Diaz drove from the opposite direction, slamming his truck across the lane, blocking the exit. "McKenna, left flank," Caleb ordered. His voice was calm, but edged with urgency. McKenna nodded, cutting through the mist. The world became sound and pulse, the roar of engines, the rhythm of boots, the low chorus of growls. Ranger lunged, teeth snapping at the door handle as the SUV skidded sideways. A man inside shouted, then the vehicle spun and crashed against a snowbank. For a long second there was only silence. Then the other SUV turned sharply and disappeared into the storm. Caleb lowered his weapon, chest heaving. "They'll circle back." Evelyn clung to the edge of the van, tears mixing with snow. "They won't stop, will they?" He looked at her, eyes dark with memory. "No, but neither will we." They drove north through the fading storm. Snowflakes tapped against the windshield like soft fingers. Evelyn sat in the back, the music box resting in her lap, its carved surface gleaming faintly in the dashboard light. Ranger sat beside her, eyes half closed but alert, his fur still damp. Caleb's hands gripped the wheel, his knuckles pale. For the first time in years, he felt something stir beneath the exhaustion, purpose, maybe even faith. He glanced at the rearview mirror. Evelyn was staring down at the box, whispering something to herself. He couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. Outside, dawn broke faintly over the horizon, cold and fragile, painting the snow in a quiet silver glow. For a brief moment the world seemed at peace, 2 souls and a dog driving toward the last truth left worth finding. Night had a thin, hard edge to it. The rain had stopped, leaving the road bright and oily under the sodium lamps. Caleb felt the engine under him like an old heartbeat. He rode low in the terrain truck, shoulders tight, breath slow. Diaz and McKenna were with him. 2 men made smaller by a long list of things they'd seen. Diaz, 38, lean, voice like gravel, had a scar along his neck and eyes that never quite relaxed. McKenna was younger, 32, broader, hands that still trembled a little if he thought about it. Both wore field jackets and habit. Both had learned to move as if silence might save them. Outside 7 shapes ran. Ranger, the gray-muzzled leader. Echo, Titan, big and steady, Blaze, lean and fierce. Ghost, thin and Shadow slow. Luna, quick-eared. Shadow, quiet and watchful. Their coats flashed wet under the lights. Their breaths were small white ghosts. Cameras on harnesses fed images to Caleb's HUD. A small blue flicker of the world as the dog saw it, close, focused, without the human noise that blinded men. The SUVs came like dark, deliberate beasts. Tires hissed, water sprayed. Caleb's voice was short, practiced. "Ranger, push right. Tighten, cut left." He felt absurdly like some drill sergeant from a life that began before memory blurred. The dogs obeyed with a rhythm he knew in his bones. The chase was not about speed as much as about edges, herding, corralling, denying escape. The first SUV tried to run the curb. Blaze hooked the driver's side, a flash of teeth and fur. Tires clipped a concrete bollard. Metal screamed. The SUV spun and kissed a pole. Two men tumbled free, cursing, fists grabbing at the wet air. For a moment everything condensed into a sound, a lone, terrible squeal of metal and the pant of dogs. Then action, as old as the world, took over. Blaze lunged, teeth found a sleeve. Ghost and Titan closed angles like hands. Caleb was down among them before he could think. He smelled oil and fear and rain. He felt Blaze's hot breath and the grip of a sleeve in his hand. A man's hand, hard and trained, aimed a gun. Caleb moved the way he had always moved, fast, not thinking, using weight and leverage, slamming shoulder and hip, until the man folded like a chair. McKenna came in from the left, cuff in hand. Diaz had the other. It was ugly and direct and brief. A second man tried to bolt and crashed into Ghost's flank. The big dog pinned him, low and methodical. The radio scream in Caleb's ear stuttered with someone calling EOD, someone calling perimeter. He felt for the man's chest as he lay face down, the world reduced to breath and heartbeat and the dull sound of his own pulse in his ears. When Caleb checked the first man's jacket, a small device slid from a hidden pocket and clinked on the asphalt. It was worse than his gut had feared. A tiny cluster of circuitry, a timer face with numbers frozen in a kind of cruel calm. His hand went cold. He heard Ranger bark, sharp, imperative, and the dog lunged toward Caleb, teeth clamping the edge of his jacket, tugging him back just as the device flared and hooded light, a glass window above them bursting outward in a spiderweb of sound. The blast was small, angry. It shattered the windshield of Diaz's truck and sent a shower of glass that glittered like bad stars. Caleb landed hard, ears ringing, and felt the weight of the dog against his thigh. He held him then, because that was the only place the world made sense. "You saved me, boy," he said, and his voice was a cracked thing. Ranger's eyes were wet, and he leaned his great head against Caleb's forearm as if to say, "I remember the man who taught me." They searched the SUV while the others cuffed and radioed and moved the prisoners into the back of the truck. Inside were the things that made the stomach in Caleb's body twist. Photographs of Evelyn taken from a distance, images time-stamped across months. A thin folder stamped Asset E01, Retrieve or Terminate, maps with halcyon nodal points circled in tight pen strokes, a small encrypted drive marked in Aaron's hand before he died. The plan lay naked and cold between them. Someone wanted the music box and what it held, bad enough to stage a bombing and a murder. The truth hung there, heavy and slow. Evelyn had not been a random target. She was bait and map and the final piece of a sensor net someone meant to own. Diaz crouched beside Caleb, voice low. "They'd kill to close this loop," he said. McKenna, pale, held his jacket closed as if to keep the cold from reaching his bones. Evelyn stood with Ranger at her feet, shaking but steady. Her eyes were bright with a kind of clarity the bereaved sometimes get, like someone who has passed through the fire and can see the iron for what it is. She touched the music box and whispered the name Aaron had told her to say if the song ever came back. It sounded like prayer and like accusation at once. They came back to the truck with evidence bagged, the rain returning in small, patient strings. Caleb strapped the music box to his chest, inside an evidence pouch that he felt like a promise. He watched Evelyn watch Ranger, watching the dark. The captured men were quiet now, mouths pressed thin, their faces like the faces of men who'd stopped believing the script they'd been given. Caleb thought of Aaron, of promises and betrayals, of a friend who used a lullaby to hide a code. He thought of the length of roads he had yet to walk. He touched the scar at his jawline, and said aloud, to no one in particular, "We'll see this through." The dog settled, circling the truck in a manner that felt almost ceremonial. In the quiet after the rain, Caleb felt the old machinery of duty hum back to life inside him, less anger than a stubborn, faithful kind of grief. He folded his hands on the wheel. The night waited, wide and patient, and for the first time in months he let himself believe that the music could lead them not to an end, but to an answer. The morning came pale and trembling. Snow melted on the hospital roof, dripping down the gutters in slow, uncertain streams. The air inside was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the steady rhythm of a heart monitor somewhere down the hall. The smell of antiseptic mingled with coffee, and beyond the half-open blinds, the world looked distant, almost forgiving. Evelyn lay on a narrow bed, her face turned toward the light. The hours since the chase had blurred into a fever of fear and exhaustion. The doctor said the shock had triggered early labor. Now, in a room lined with quiet machines, she breathed through each wave of pain, whispering Aaron's name between the breaths. "We made it," she said softly, as if speaking to a ghost who could hear. Her hands reached for the small wooden music box resting on the bedside table. It had been cleaned of soot but still carried the faint scent of smoke. The song, when she wound it, was slower now, tender, like a lullaby meant for one last promise. Caleb stood in the doorway. His jacket was damp, his face lined with fatigue. He had known the battlefield in every form, but this waiting, was the kind of quiet that aged a man. Ranger lay at his feet, head on his paws, watching the room with steady amber eyes. There was a warmth in that gaze, something patient, almost human. Caleb knelt beside the dog and whispered, "She's stronger than she knows." Ranger's tail flicked once, as if in quiet agreement. When the nurse called him over, Caleb stepped inside, setting his rifle aside. "She's stable," the nurse said, "but she needs rest." Evelyn managed a faint smile. "We found the truth, didn't we?" Caleb hesitated. "Almost," he said, voice low. "But there's something still inside that box." Later, when the hallway had emptied and night folded around the hospital, Caleb sat at the small desk beside the window. Ranger's head lifted when Caleb opened the music box once more. The melody began, "You Are My Sunshine," soft and broken at first. Caleb turned the winding key and felt a click that hadn't been there before. Beneath the rotating spindle, hidden beneath a thin layer of brass, was a false bottom. He pried it open with the edge of his knife. Inside lay a small data chip, no bigger than a fingernail, and a folded piece of paper aged with sweat and sand. Caleb unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was unmistakable. Aaron Brooks, firm, deliberate, the writing of a soldier who still believed in permanence. Then came the voice, faint and mechanical, as the chip activated. Aaron's voice filled the room, warm, calm, steady. "If you're hearing this, it means I didn't come home. Ether Corps betrayed us. They killed Halcyon to bury what we found. Caleb, protect her. She doesn't know how deep this runs. And Evelyn, if you're listening, remember, inside this song, I left the one thing they can't destroy, faith." Caleb closed his eyes. The words moved through him like a tide returning to shore after years of silence. Ranger looked up, ears twitching at the sound, as if he recognized the voice of his old handler. For a moment, man and dog stood perfectly still, the two who had survived when others hadn't. Caleb felt something lift in him, something small and fierce. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was the feeling that maybe the world could still be mended. Then, from the room next door, a new sound broke through. The first cry of a newborn child. It cut through the quiet like light through cloud. Caleb turned toward the door. The music box still played, its tune wrapping around the child's cry like a benediction. The nurse smiled through the doorway. "She's here," she said. "A little girl." Caleb felt the corner of his mouth lift. He placed the letter back into the box, closing it with care. "You hear that, Aaron?" he murmured. "Your sunshine's here." Ranger wagged his tail, low and slow. Later, when the storm outside had turned to rain again, Caleb stood by the window, the city lights shimmering in puddles below. Evelyn slept with the baby in her arms, the music box resting on the blanket beside her. The room smelled of warmth and milk and cedar. For the first time in years, Caleb felt peace. He looked at Ranger and whispered, "We did what we could." The dog blinked, steady and solemn, then laid his head down. Caleb watched the mother and child and thought of all the ghosts who would never see this dawn. He thought of the promise buried in the song, and of the kind of faith that lives not in words, but in those who keep walking when the road is dark. The music box ticked once more and fell silent. Outside, the rain eased. The first light of morning found the room soft and gold, as if it had been waiting there all along. The first snow of January fell softly over Arlington. Each flake drifted down as if afraid to touch the ground, melting on the black coats of the men and dogs who stood in silence. The air was cold enough to still the breath in one's chest, yet there was warmth in the way people stood close together, shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart. The flags moved faintly in the wind. Somewhere beyond the rows of white stones, a trumpet began to play taps, slow and clean, like a heartbeat that refused to end. Evelyn stood near the front, holding her daughter close beneath a gray wool blanket. The child slept, her tiny fingers curled around the edge of the fabric. Evelyn's face was pale but calm, the kind of calm that only comes after grief has burned itself down to quiet. She wore Aaron's old field jacket over her hospital coat. It hung loose around her shoulders, smelling faintly of cedar and rain. Beside her, Caleb Stone stood straight in his Navy uniform, the medals catching the winter light. His face was older now, lined with something that wasn't sorrow anymore but reverence. Behind them, the 7 seal dogs sat in perfect formation, still and dignified. Ranger led them at the center, his muzzle silvered with age, his eyes bright beneath the overcast sky. He didn't move or whine, just watched, as if he understood that silence was the language of memory. A Navy officer stepped forward to read the names of the fallen. When the voice reached Captain Aaron Brooks, Evelyn's knees trembled. The words restored to honor carried across the field and lingered, mingling with the breath of the cold air. She looked at Caleb, and he gave a small nod. For months they had carried the truth like a hidden ember, and now the world finally saw its light. The evidence from the music box had brought Ether Corps to trial, unmasking the crimes that had buried men like Aaron. The world would remember him not as a traitor, but as the man who tried to save others from the silence. Caleb's hands, gloved in black, tightened slightly at his side. For him, the ceremony was not closure, but promise, one more oath to keep. He looked down at Ranger and whispered, "We made it, boy." The dog's ears flicked, and for a fleeting second, Caleb thought he saw recognition there, some echo of the desert sun, of the man who had once commanded them both. When the trumpet faded, Evelyn stepped forward. She placed the olive wood music box at the base of the memorial stone. The lid was cracked now, edges darkened by time and smoke, but the mechanism still worked. With trembling fingers, she wound it once. The tune began, "You Are My Sunshine," thin, trembling, but unmistakably alive. The melody carried over the snow, winding between rows of graves, touching faces turned upward in quiet reverence. Evelyn spoke softly, though everyone seemed to hear her. "He used to say, 'Faith doesn't end with the body,'" she said. "It moves through those who still believe." Her voice wavered. "I think he can still hear us." Caleb stepped closer, his breath visible in the cold. "And Ranger," he said gently, "still answers." Ranger let out a low, resonant bark, once steady and sure. The sound rolled across the white field like a vow, returning home. The circle formed without command. One by one the dogs moved, surrounding Evelyn and the child. Their paws pressed into the snow, marking 7 small impressions around mother and daughter. Ranger stopped in front of them, head bowed slightly. It was not training, it was instinct, something older and purer. The morning light broke through the clouds then, catching the snow and the brass insignia on Caleb's chest, painting everything in gold. Evelyn looked down at her daughter, whose tiny hand reached out toward the sound of the music box. The melody faltered once, then found its rhythm again. She smiled through the tears. "He'll never stop listening," she whispered. Caleb nodded. "No," he said softly, "and neither will we." For a long moment the world stood still, the living and the lost sharing the same quiet breath. The song came to its final note, and then silence took its place, gentle and complete. The wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of a voice only they could hear. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." And in that circle of snow and light, faith didn't end, it simply changed form. Sometimes God doesn't show himself in miracles. He shows himself in moments. In a dog that stays, a mother who never gives up, and a song that carries through the years. Even after loss, faith always finds a way home. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe, share, and tell us where you're watching from. May God bless those who still believe in love, in loyalty, and in the quiet power of second chances. Until we meet again, stay kind, stay hopeful, and may peace be with you.